Hello, and welcome to episode of Big Sister Talks. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the big life events that we go through, and that is becoming an adult. Now, the way this series works is basically I pick a topic, or if you guys want to recommend a topic, my DMs are always open, but there is a topic or a focus of every episode, and I give you guys the advice that I would give to someone who was near and dear to me if they were going through the particular set of life events in discussion. This number will vary depending on the country you call home, but in Australia, you are an adult as of the age of 18. Now, for a lot of people, that time frame actually marks two major milestones that generally occur within a pretty close proximity to each other, and that is leaving high school and becoming an adult. Obviously, there are a lot of fun things that we associate with becoming an adult, but I feel like there are a lot of things that also aren't discussed, and you kind of have to find out by yourself, and some of us sometimes find these things out a little bit too late. It obviously goes without saying that everything that I'm about to say applies to Australia, but I feel like most countries will have similar type of things that you will have to go through as an adult. Let's talk voting. Now, once you turn 18, you actually legally have to vote. There is a fine if you don't vote. I do think, however, though, it's like $50. So I know some people personally who think it's better to just pay the fine than vote, but I definitely go and vote. Now, in order to vote, you have to be enrolled in voting. Now, when I was in high school, I think I was around 16 when my school kind of started the discussions, and they helped us go through the process of enrolling. You can enroll to vote from the age of 16, but you can't actually vote until you're 18. Now, something that's really important to keep in mind is you need to remember that every single time you move, you have to change your residential address with the AEC. And I made this mistake the first time I moved. I didn't change my residential address, and then there was an election, and this was one of the ones where you have to kind of vote in the electorate that you're registered to vote in. If you're, for example, at a federal election, you can vote anywhere, but when we're doing state elections, you have to go back to the electorate that you're registered in. And I didn't change my address, so I ended up having to make a 60-minute commute back to what was effectively my parents' place to vote. And that is definitely a hassle I don't want to have to go through again. Jury duty is another kind of like responsibility in Australia. So once you turn 18, you can actually be called up as a juror. Now, the way this works is it doesn't come 100% as a surprise. You do get a letter at some point that says, hey, by the way, you're going to be added to the list for the next 12 months. And I will say I've received this letter like 3 times in my life. So at some point, actually, I haven't been over 18 that long. So at some point, I was on 3 separate occasions on a list of like potential jurors. And they send you this letter and say, hey, we can send you a letter in the next 12 months and call you for jury duty. Like I said, I got that letter 3 times. Only on one occasion did I get like a follow-up letter that actually said, hey, you've been selected for jury duty. And it gives you a set of instructions, and you go to the courthouse that you have to go to, and then they actually end up with a lot of people for that particular case, because they kind of send these letters out, not so much as a blanket, but they send it to a lot of people, and there's a margin for what I'm going to call dropouts. But like, if you have a valid reason, you can be excused from jury duty. So for example, my grandparents, my grandmother has on multiple occasions received letters calling her to jury duty, and every single time you have to go fill out paperwork and say, hey, she can't because she literally does not have a sufficient understanding of English to be able to actively participate on the jury. Now, if you get that letter and you choose not to show up and you don't have a valid reason, you could actually receive a fine of over $2,000. Like I said, I've been summoned once for jury duty. I didn't end up making the cut for the final jury. So in terms of information that I can give you guys, this is kind of where it ends, because that is as far as I've gotten in the jury duty process. Let's talk private health insurance. Now, this is definitely one of those areas that is a little bit more confusing, because you have the law, or in this case, the 2020/2021 budget. When I say that, I'm referring to the federal budget. So you have the outline of the budget, and then you have the outlines of the policy providers, and they're two different things. Now, anyone who is under the age of 18 and has private health insurance would have been listed as a dependent. And what that means is, like, the insurance is in my parents' name, and then myself and my sister are listed as dependents on their insurance. Once you turn 18, whether you stay or don't stay on your parents' insurance comes down to quite a few factors, including the situation that you might find yourself in. Now, the easiest way to explain this is going to be going into a little bit of detail about what the 2020-2021 federal budget actually reviewed. In the 2020-2021 federal budget, they determined that it is possible for an individual to remain on their parents' private health insurance policy up to the age of 31. However, this was only if your insurer allows it. So it previously was 24 years old, and then they increased it to 31. So they added an extra 6 years to it. And the main reason behind it was to alleviate financial strain on young adults. Now, you definitely need to check with the provider and see if you meet the terms to stay on your parents' policies as a dependent. Now, my parents are with Medibank, so I'm going to tell you what their policy is. Now, as an adult, you can stay on until the age of 21 completely free of charge, which is what I did, or until 25 if you are studying full-time. But you need to be studying full-time for that duration. So I finished studying when I was 22 and I came off their policy. Now, between 21 and 24, if you are not studying full-time, you can remain on at an additional cost. However, regardless of your education status, if you are married or in a de facto relationship, you cannot stay on for any reason. Now, if you are in a position where you can stay on, so this is when you're between, that 25 and 31 age, if you want to stay on, I would highly advise looking at the cost of getting singles insurance. You need to keep in mind, for example, that my parents pretty much had like a top of the range private health cover, and I just didn't need that much. So I ultimately ended up on my own singles policy, and then I ended up on what I currently hold now, which is a couples insurance policy. So we're going to ignore the fact that I'm de facto, so I wouldn't be able to remain on their policy anyway. But for couples insurance, we currently pay $36 or $37 per fortnight, and I think my parents are paying at least triple that, probably more, because I remember there was discussions of, like, at the time I was like borderlining on de facto, and it was just a whopping amount of money to pay for a lot of things that I didn't see myself needing in the foreseeable future. Like, I didn't need anything for like menopause and stuff. I didn't need a lot of things that were more age related and advanced age health conditions. I didn't need like things that related to like arthritis. Next up, let's talk Medicare card. So Medicare is something you can do before you turn 18, but you can separate yourself from your parents' Medicare card. So if you remember, or if you've seen or if you've been to the doctors or any appointments, your parents will have your Medicare card and you'll be listed as like a dependent. So it'll be like the first name is usually your mum's, and this is on the basis that like majority of families, the mothers are raising the kids and they're with the kids more. So if the kids have to go to a doctor appointment or something, it's mum who takes them. My dad has had his own Medicare card. My mum has hers, and then me and my sister are listed as like number 2 and 3 on her Medicare card. Now, I'm not 100% sure of the age, but I know that you can definitely do this before you turn 18 because I did. But you can separate yourself from your parents' Medicare card. So that means you get your own physical card and you can go to your appointments by yourself. You don't have to disclose appointments to your parents because you're not asking for your Medicare card, things like that. This one is definitely a very, very simple one to do, and you just go online, you fill out a form, you submit it, you wait for your new card to arrive. Nice and simple. Next up, let's talk tax returns. Now, if you had a job prior to 18, you may have done taxes before. Otherwise, you may just start doing them with your first job. Now, don't need to freak out if you have not done a tax return yet and you haven't earned more than the $18,200 threshold. Then there's no late fees, there's no penalties or anything like that. That being said, once you turn 18, I definitely suggest that you get them in on time. And if you are someone who is making the choice to work in like a sole trader contractor situation, highly advise that you get an accountant because that's when taxes start to get complicated. There's a lot of taxation offices. The one that I can think of is like H&R accounts, and they pop up everywhere at the end of financial year. And from what I've been told, they have relatively cheap fees. You don't have to sign anything long term. It's like a one-time service to help you get your taxes in before the cutoff. Don't quote me, but I believe the cutoff for personal taxes is 31st of October if you are not using an accountant. If you choose to use an accountant, you get a little bit more time, but I don't know exactly how much more time you get. Also, I definitely recommend accountants as well if you are in a work from home situation, because deductions get really, really complicated and they always use different methods. They have preferences for different methods. You get different outcomes with different methods. Also, keep your receipts. Now, this next thing, I don't actually have a lot of experience with personally, if any. However, I did do a little bit of research into it, and that is financial aid. Now, financial aid is definitely available to people who need it and who apply for it and who qualify for it. However, the criteria ranges depending on what sort of financial aid you are applying for, and if you do get approved for a certain type of aid, there is generally like follow-ups and regulations that you have to abide by. Otherwise, you may risk losing the financial aid. And I know of cases where people have lied on their paperwork and they've been caught, and then they've been forced to like repay that amount back that they essentially illegally gained because you frauded financial aid into giving you money that you weren't entitled to. Now, the other thing to consider is if you are actually under the age of 22, you are considered a dependent. And that means whatever financial aid you are trying to apply for, they will take into consideration your parents' income. So if you are someone who is genuinely not being financially supported by your parents in any way, shape or form, there are ways that you can be like separated from them from a dependency point of view. I know this because I have a friend who has done that in the past because her parents earned significantly more than the threshold for financial aid, but they had basically like cut her off, for a lack of better words. And she did go through a few processes to get herself like separated from her parents, but that is also a long process, and she hasn't really gone into details about it with me, so there's not much that I can pass on to you guys, but there definitely is ways to go about it. I just can't recommend anything. I wanted to start off with this, but this also seems like a really morbid start, and now that we're getting to the end of it, this seems like a really morbid end, so we're going to do it second last. Now, when you were a child, it didn't matter, you know, at what age. There was a certain point in time where you would have some degree of say over what was happening, but at the end of the day, your parents got the final say. Now that you're 18, or maybe you're heading towards 18, you need to know that while your parents' considerations will be taken in the event of a medical emergency, it is much better and much safer for you to have something in writing, or appointing someone specifically to make those medical decisions for you. And I get it, it's a very hard conversation to have, so maybe you don't want to have it the day you turn 18, but you might want to start thinking about what your wishes are. Like if you were to end up in a coma, what do you want your family to do? If you were to end up brain dead, for example, or if you were actually to die, do you want to be an organ donor? How do you want to be buried? What are some of those wishes? And I will be honest, I haven't even had, you know, all of those conversations with my fiance, but they're definitely conversations that you do need to have. To some degree, he is aware of, I would say, like 60% of my end of life wishes, because I feel like there's a lot of things that I myself haven't even decided yet when it comes to, you know, when that time comes. But you need to start having those discussions. If you don't have a long-term partner, that's fine. If you've got siblings, talk to your siblings about it, because at the end of the day, if something was to happen, you need to have some sort of idea what you want done with your remains. For example, like my grandmother, granted she's up there in age, she's definitely been very, very open about her end of life wishes and how she wants to be farewelled. And I think it's good to have those open discussions. Otherwise you just end up with like your family fighting with each other, because every person thinks they know what is best for you and they've probably got a different opinion. At least this way you've given your wishes and people are aware of what you want done with your remains. Another thing to consider is power of attorney and enduring guardianship. Now, I feel like these terms are used synonymously a lot, but they are not. They vary slightly in definition. Power of attorney gives someone the ability to make financial and legal decisions on your behalf should it be determined that you are not of capacity to do so. Enduring guardianship gives someone the right to make personal and medical decisions for you should you be determined to not be able to make those decisions for yourself. Now, for me personally, my power of attorney and enduring guardianship have been assigned to the same person. However, that doesn't have to be the case because they are two different positions and they are defined separately. You can assign power of attorney to one person and enduring guardianship to another person. In New South Wales specifically, a spouse does not automatically get power of attorney or enduring guardianship. That is something to keep in mind and probably worth looking into. I think other states potentially have a similar rule, but I know specifically New South Wales, it is not by default of marriage that you get your spouse as your power of attorney or your enduring guardianship. The last thing to talk about is changing relationships, and I'm specifically talking about the relationship that you have with your parents. Now, I think from mid-teens, it probably would have already started, but once you get to 18 and you're an adult, it definitely changes and there's another shift again. You are no longer this child who needs constant guidance. Yes, you can always go back to your parents for guidance, but at the end of the day, they have done their job, they've done the hard yards, they've raised you. The relationship definitely changes a lot. You also start talking about different things. For example, like I'm at a stage in my life now where I'm getting ready to get married, and my parents are having a lot more of those type of conversations, talking about, you know, marriage and post-marriage and like my thoughts on starting a family, things like that. And those are topics that, you know, obviously your parents probably didn't talk about with you when you were 12 or 13, for example, but at 24 might be open to the table. I will say I never had the stereotypical like Asian tiger mom. I definitely still had a mother who was very, very involved, who still wanted to like meet all of my friends before I was hanging out with them. I didn't do sleepovers literally until I was like an adult, but I also didn't have that extremely open relationship with my parents when it came to talking about things, and it's been a learning curve. And I've been saying this with my sister, I'm like, I still feel like there are some things that I want to keep private from my parents, and I feel like we all do have those things, and that's fine, but you're definitely a lot more open. The topics that you discuss change drastically, and like the things that you think you can discuss, the things that you feel like you can discuss, and the things that you want to discuss, that scope kind of changes a little bit. That is it for today's episode. If you have any further questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments. I feel like this was a lot of rambling on my part, so apologies for that. Congratulations if you made it to the end. But that is it for today, and I hope you can take something from this little conversation. Bye.